I've never told this story before because even now, years later, it still sends shivers down my spine. It happened when I was 17, living with my mom in a small house on the edge of a dense forest. Our backyard stretched out into the woods, the kind of place that was eerily beautiful in the daytime, but turned into a pitch-black nightmare once the sun went down. My mom worked late shifts at a hospital, so I spent a lot of evenings home alone. It wasn't usually a big deal. I'd lock the doors, watch TV, and wait for her to come home around midnight. But one night, something happened that made me swear I'd never stay in that house alone again. It started around 10 p.m. I was curled up on the couch with my headphones on, watching a movie. The house was dead silent except for the sound of rain tapping against the windows. Then out of nowhere, I felt it. This strange, heavy pressure, like the air had changed. I paused the movie and pulled off my headphones, listening. At first I heard nothing, but then faintly, I picked up on something just outside, a faint tap, tap, tap. I froze, straining to hear through the rain. It sounded like footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from the backyard. I told myself it was probably just a deer or maybe a raccoon, but then the sound stopped, right by the back door. My heart started pounding. I stood up and crept toward the kitchen, where the door leading to the backyard was. The small window on the door was fogged up from the cold, but as I got closer, I saw it. A handprint smeared across the glass. It was fresh. I backed away slowly, grabbing my phone to call my mom. But before I could dial, the motion-activated light in the backyard flickered on. I turned toward the window, and that's when I saw it. A faint red glow, deep in the woods, just past the tree line. It wasn't like a flashlight or a campfire. It was unnatural, pulsating like it was alive. And worse, it was moving, getting closer. I panicked. I locked the back door and ran around the house, double-checking every lock and closing every curtain. But no matter where I went, I could still see the red glow through the windows, slowly weaving between the trees, heading toward the house. I crouched in the living room, my hands shaking as I held my phone. I wanted to call the police, but what would I even say? There's a weird red light in the woods. They'd think I was insane. The glow reached the edge of the yard, and for a moment, everything went silent. No rain, no wind, just this deafening, unnatural stillness. Then the tapping started again. This time, it was louder, more insistent, like someone was knocking on the windows all around the house. I pressed myself against the wall, trying to stay out of sight. The lights flickered, and in the brief moment of darkness, I heard it. A voice, low and distorted, coming from outside. "Let me in." I bit down on my lip to stop myself from screaming. The lights came back on, and when I dared to peek out the living room window, the glow was gone. But something else was there. Standing in the middle of the yard was a figure, tall, thin, and completely still. Its face was pale, almost white, and its eyes were glowing red, the same pulsating red as the light in the woods. It tilted its head as if it could see me through the curtains and raised a long, bony hand to tap on the glass. I don't remember much after that. I think I blacked out because the next thing I knew, I was sitting on the floor, clutching my phone. It was almost midnight, and the house was silent again. When my mom came home, I tried to tell her what had happened, but she just laughed it off, saying I must have fallen asleep and had a nightmare. But I know what I saw, and sometimes, when I'm driving past the woods late at night, I swear I can still see that faint red glow flickering between the trees, waiting for me to come back. I moved into a small apartment downtown. It wasn't much, just a one-bedroom unit in an old brick building that had seen better days. The walls were thin, the floors creaked, and the plumbing groaned whenever you used the water. But it was cheap, and I needed a place fast. The first few weeks were uneventful. I'd hear my neighbors sometimes, muffled conversations, laughter, the occasional argument. It wasn't intrusive, just background noise. But one night I heard something that wasn't so easy to ignore. It was late, around 2 a.m., and I was lying in bed, scrolling on my phone. The apartment was quiet, except for the faint hum of traffic outside. That's when I heard it. A voice. It was low, barely audible, and it sounded like it was coming from inside the walls. At first, I thought it was my downstairs neighbor's TV or someone talking in the hall. But as I listened closer, I realized it wasn't coming from anywhere normal. It was coming directly from the wall behind my bed. The voice was muffled, but I could make out a few words. "Can you hear me?" I froze. It wasn't a normal tone of voice. It was almost like a whisper, soft and raspy. I tried to convince myself it was just the building carrying sound weirdly, but the thought didn't stick. "I know you're there," the voice said. At this point, my heart was pounding. I got up and pressed my ear to the wall, trying to figure out if it really was coming from the other side. But the wall was cold and silent. Then, clear as day, the voice came again. "Come closer." I jumped back, nearly tripping over myself. There was no way this was just some weird echo from the neighbors. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room with every light in the apartment on, clutching a baseball bat I'd found in the closet. By morning, I was convinced I had imagined the whole thing. Maybe I was half asleep, or maybe the stress of moving had gotten to me. But then it happened again the next night. This time, the voice came from the living room wall. I was watching TV when I heard it, a faint whisper. I muted the TV and listened. "Why won't you talk to me?" It wasn't just the words, it was the tone. There was something cold in that voice, something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I bolted out of the apartment that night and stayed at a friend's place. The next day, I called my landlord and told him about the noises. He sounded annoyed and brushed it off, saying it was probably just the pipes or the neighbors. A few days later, I decided to stay in the apartment again. I didn't have a choice. I couldn't afford to break my lease, and I was trying to convince myself it wasn't real. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Around 3 a.m., I heard it again. This time, it was louder, clearer. "Let me in." I sat up, heart racing. The voice didn't sound like it was coming from the walls anymore. It sounded like it was right there in the room with me. And then I saw it. In the corner of my bedroom, near the closet, there was a shadow. At first, I thought it was just the way the moonlight was hitting the furniture. But then it moved. It shifted and stretched, almost like it was stepping forward. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The shadow grew taller, darker, until it almost reached the ceiling. "You shouldn't have ignored me," the voice whispered, louder this time, echoing. I don't remember grabbing my keys or running out the door, but the next thing I knew, I was in my car, shaking, driving away from the building as fast as I could. The landlord called me the next day, furious that I'd left the apartment unlocked. I didn't care. I told him I wasn't coming back. A week later, I got a call from him again, shaken. He told me that the new tenant had moved in and moved out within 2 days. They heard voices too, And here's the part that chills me the most. He said the tenants swore they found a message scratched into the wall behind the bed. It was just 3 words. "Let me out."